Okay, everybody. So, welcome to story time. So there's going to be some changes coming up that I want to address before we actually get started. First off, we are back to going live on both YouTube and TikTok for story time. Secondly, I am no longer going to be responding to comments during the live. The reason for that being is that the comments get too bogged down. They make me squirrel. And I end up getting off track, off topic a lot, which turns which should be like a 45-minute story time into 2.5 hours. Which, I should be doing other lives for that, not story time. Because people come here to listen to the story and talk, or listen to the story and kind of chill out and zone out. And that's what I want to keep it as. Secondly, starting next Monday, we are actually going to be adding a third book into the weekly story times. So we're still going to be doing the Percy Jackson books and I completely forgot about my microphone, so I'm not entirely sure what YouTube has heard or not. But we are still going to be reading Percy Jackson and the Sword of Truth series. However, before that book, we are going to have another extra special little friendly story time, which will include a children's book like Dr. Seuss, something like that. I'm also going to start sharing my screen on the computer so that you guys can actually see the book as I'm going through, since, Dr. Seuss tends to be more of a picture storytime book than just words. So, in order to get that visual effect, I'm also going to be sharing my screen so you guys can see the book like I'm seeing it. So, we are going to get started now with Chapter 10 of Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse by Riordan. Chapter 10. I break a few rocket ships. I tore across the mall, not daring to look behind me. I burst into the Air and Space Museum and took off my invisibility cap once I was through the admissions area. The main part of the museum was one huge room with rockets and airplanes hanging from the ceiling. 3 levels of balconies curled around so you could look at the exhibits from all different heights. The place wasn't crowded, just a few families and a couple of tour groups of kids, probably doing one of those holiday school trips. I wanted to yell at them all to leave, but I figured that would only get me arrested. I had to find Thalia and Grover and the hunters. Any minute, the skeleton dudes were going to invade the museum, and I didn't think they would settle for an audio tour. I ran into Thalia, literally. I was barreling up the ramp to the top floor balcony and slammed into her, knocking her into an Apollo space capsule. Grover yelped in surprise. Before I could regain my balance, Zoe and Bianca had arrows notched aimed at my chest. Their bows had just appeared out of nowhere. When Zoe realized who I was, she didn't seem anxious to lower her bow. "You! How dare you show thy face here?" "Percy," Grover said. "Thank goodness." Zoe glared at him and he blushed. Gosh, you're not supposed to be here." "Luke," I said, trying to catch my breath. "He's here." The anger in Thalia's eyes immediately melted. She put her hand on her silver bracelet. "Where?" I told them about the Natural History Museum, Dr. Thorne, Luke, and the General. "The General is here?" Zoe looked stunned. "That is impossible. You lie." "Why would I lie? Look, there's no time. Skeleton warriors." "What?" Thalia demanded. "How many?" 12, I said. "And that's not all. That guy, the General, he said he was sending something, a playmate, to distract you over here, a monster." Thalia and Grover exchanged looks. "We were following Artemis's trail," Grover said. "I was pretty sure it led here. Some powerful monster sent. She must have stopped here looking for the mystery monster, but we haven't found anything yet." "Zoe," Bianca said nervously, "if it is the General—" "It cannot be," Zoe snapped. "Percy must have seen an iris message or some other illusion." "Illusions don't crack marble floors," I told her. Zoe took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. I didn't know why she was taking it so personally or how she knew this General guy, but I figured now wasn't the time to ask. "If Percy is telling the truth about the skeleton warriors," she said, "we have no time to argue. They are the worst, the most horrible. We must leave now." "Good idea," I said. I was not including thee, boy, Zoe said. You are not part of this quest. Hey, I'm trying to save your lives. You shouldn't have come, Percy, Dahlia said grimly. But you're here now. Come on, let's get back to the van. That is not thy decision, Zoe snapped. Dahlia scowled at her. You're not the boss here, Zoe. I don't care how old you are. You're still a conceited little brat. You've never had any wisdom when it came to boys, Zoe growled. You never could leave them behind. Dahlia looked like she was about to hit Zoe. Then everyone froze. I heard her growl so loud I thought one of the rocket engines was starting up. Below us, a few adults screamed. A little kid's voice screeched with delight. Kitty! Something enormous bounded up the ramp. It was the size of a pickup truck with silver claws and golden glittering fur. I'd seen this monster once before. 2 years ago, I'd glimpsed it briefly from a train. Now, up close and personal, it looked even bigger. The Nemean lion, Thalia said. Don't move. The lion roared so loud it parted my hair. Its fangs gleamed like stainless steel. Separate on my mark, Zoe said. Try to keep it distracted. Until when? Grover asked. Until I think of a way to kill it. Go! I uncapped Riptide and rolled to the left. Arrows whistled past me, and Grover played a sharp tweet tweet cadence on his reed pipes. I turned and saw Zoe and Bianca climbing the Apollo capsule. They were firing arrows one after another, all shattering harmlessly against the lion's metallic fur. The lion swiped the capsule and tipped it on its side, spilling the hunters off the back. Grover played a frantic, horrible tune, and the lion turned toward him, but Thalia stepped into its path, holding up Aegis, and the lion recoiled. Roar! Hi-ya, Thalia said. Back! The lion growled and clawed the air, but it retreated as if the shield were a blazing fire. For a second, I thought Thalia had it under control. Then I saw the lion crouching, its leg muscles tensing. I had seen enough cat fights in the alleys around my apartment in New York. I knew the lion was going to pounce. Hey, I yelled. I don't know what I was thinking, but I charged the beast. I just wanted to get it away from my friends. I slashed with Riptide, a good strike to the flank that should have cut the monster into Meow Mix, but the blade just clanged against its fur in a burst of sparks. The lion raked me with its claws, ripping off a chunk of my coat. I backed against the railing. It sprang at me, 1,000 pounds of monster, and I had no choice but to turn and jump. I landed on the wing of an old-fashioned silver airplane, which pitched and almost spilled me to the floor 3 stories below. An arrow whizzed past my head. The lion jumped into the aircraft, and the cords holding the plane began to groan. The lion swiped at me, and I dropped onto the next exhibit, a weird-looking spacecraft with blades like a helicopter. I looked up and saw the lion roar. Inside its maw, a pink tongue and throat. Its mouth, I thought. Its fur was completely invulnerable, but if I could strike it in the mouth... The only problem was, the monster moved too quickly. Between its claws and fangs, I couldn't get close without getting sliced to pieces. Zoe, I shouted, target the mouth. The monster lunged. An arrow zipped past it, missing completely, and I dropped from the spaceship onto the top of a floor exhibit, a huge model of the Earth. I slid down Russia and dropped off the equator. The Nemean lion growled and steadied itself on the spacecraft, but its weight was too much. One of the cords snapped. As the display swung down like a pendulum, the lion leaped off onto the model Earth's North Pole. Grover, I yelled, clear the area! Groups of kids were running around screaming. Grover tried to corral them away from the monster just as the other cord on the spaceship snapped and the exhibit crashed to the floor. Thalia dropped off the second floor railing and landed across from me on the other side of the globe. The lion regarded us both, trying to decide which of us to kill first. Zoe and Bianca were above us, bows ready, but they kept having to move around to get a good angle. No clear shot, Zoe yelled. Get it to open its mouth more. The lion snarled from the top of the globe. I looked around. Options. I needed the gift shop. I had a vague memory from my trip here as a little kid. Something I'd made my mom buy me, and I'd regretted it. If they still sold that stuff, Thalia, I said, keep it occupied. She nodded grimly. Hi-ya! She pointed her spear at a spidery arc of blue, and a spidery arc of blue electricity shot out, zapping the lion in the tail. Roar! The lion turned and pounced. Thalia rolled out of its way, holding up Aegis to keep the monster at bay, and I ran for the gift shop. This is no time for souvenirs, boy, Zoe yelled. I dashed into the shop, knocking over rows of t-shirts, jumping over tables full of glow-in-the-dark planets and spacesuits. The sales lady didn't protest. She was too busy cowering behind her cash register. There, on the far wall, glittery silver packets, whole racks of them. I scooped up every kind I could find and ran out of the shop with an armful. Zoe and Bianca were still showering arrows on the monster, but it was no good. The lion seemed to know better than to open its mouth too much. It snapped at Thalia, slashing with its claws. It even kept its eyes narrowed to tiny slits. Thalia jabbed at the monster and backed up. The lion pressed her. Percy, she called, whatever you're going to do. The lion roared and swatted her like a cat toy, sending her flying into the side of a Titan rocket. Her head hit the metal and she slid to the floor. Hey, I yelled at the lion. I was too far away to strike, so I took a risk. I hurled Riptide like a throwing knife. It bounced off the lion's side, but that was enough to get the monster's attention. It turned toward me and snarled. There was only one way to get close enough. I charged, and as the lion leapt to intercept me, I chunked a space food pouch into its maw, a chunk of cellophane-wrapped, freeze-dried strawberry parfait. The lion's eyes got wide, and it gagged like a cat with a hairball. I couldn't blame it. I remembered feeling the same way when I tried to eat space food as a kid. The stuff was just plain nasty. Zoe, get ready, I yelled. Behind me, I could hear people screaming. Grover was playing another horrible song on his pipes. I scrambled away from the lion. It managed to choke down the space food packet and looked at me with pure hate. Snack time, I yelled. It made the mistake of roaring at me, and I got an ice cream sandwich in its throat. Fortunately, I'd always been a pretty good pitcher, even though baseball wasn't my game. Before the lion could stop gagging, I shot in 2 more flavors of ice cream and a freeze-dried spaghetti dinner. The lion's eyes bugged. It opened its mouth wide and reared up on its back paws, trying to get away from me. Now, I yelled. Immediately, arrows pierced the lion's maw. 2, 4, 6. The lion thrashed wildly, turned, and fell backward. And then it was still. Alarms wailed throughout the museum. People were flocking to the exits. Security guards were running around in a panic with no idea what was going on. Grover knelt at Thalia's side and helped her up. She seemed okay, just a little dazed. Zoe and Bianca dropped from the balcony and landed next to me. Zoe eyed me cautiously. That was an interesting strategy. Hey, it worked. She didn't argue. The lion seemed to be melting, the way dead monsters do sometimes, until there was nothing left but its glittering fur coat. And even that seemed to be shrinking to the size of a normal lion's pelt. Take it, Zoe told me. I stared at her. What, the lion's fur? Isn't that like an animal rights violation or something? It is the spoil of war, she told me. It is rightfully thine. You killed it, I said. She shook her head, almost smiling. I think thy ice cream sandwich did that. Fair is fair, Percy Jackson. Take the fur. I lifted it up. It was surprisingly light. The fur was smooth and soft. It didn't feel at all like something that could stop a blade. As I watched, the pelt shifted and changed into a coat. A full-length golden brown duster. Not exactly my style, I murmured. We have to get out of here, Grover said. The security guards won't stay confused for long. I noticed for the first time how strange it was the guards hadn't rushed forward to arrest us. They were scrambling in all directions except ours, like they were madly searching for something. A few were running into the walls or each other. You did that? I asked Grover. He nodded, looking a little embarrassed. A minor confusion song. I played some Barry Manilow. It works every time, but it only lasts a few seconds. The security guards are not our biggest worry, Zoe said. Look. Through the glass walls of the museum, I could see a group of men walking across the lawn. Gray men in gray camouflage outfits. They were too far away for us to see their eyes, but I could feel their gaze aimed straight at me. Go, I said. They'll be hunting me. I'll distract them. No, Zoe said. We go together. I stared at her. But you said, you are part of this quest now, Zoe said grudgingly. I do not like it, but there is no changing fate. You are the 5th quest member, and we are not leaving anyone behind. Sweet. And that ends Chapter 10 of Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse. must resist the urge. Okay, we are going to be switching to the non-little friendly book, which is Stone of Tears by Terry Goodkind, and we are on chapter 36. So where we left off, basically Zed and Addie are starting to lose their magic. They don't know what's going on with it, but they think it has something to do with the scratch from the scrin that they ended up getting. This chapter, though, we are going to pick up with Richard and Sister Verna just on the other side of the boundary, heading into the old world. So let me see here. Let's see here. So this one is just going to be a long interaction between um, Richard and Sister Verna, and also a new, very special character. Let's pick up with chapter 36. The Wolverine grew larger in his vision. The arrow waited for the flat, dark head to lift. A low growl came from behind his left shoulder. Quiet, Richard hissed. The Gar fell silent. The Wolverine's head rose. With a zip, the arrow was away. Wings a quiver. The little Gar bounced on the balls of its feet, its attention riveted to the flight of the arrow. Wait, he whispered. The Gar froze. With a solid thunk, the arrow found its target. The Gar squealed in glee, wings spreading and flapping. It bounced higher and turned to him. Richard leaned close and pointed a finger at the Gar's wrinkly nose. The Gar watched him attentively. All right, but you bring me back my arrow. Head bobbing in quick agreement, the Gar bounded into the air. Richard watched by the dim early dawn light as it swooped down on the dead quarry, pouncing as if it were about to escape. Fur flew as claws ripped. The dark silhouette lowered, its wings folding against its back as it hunched over the prey, growling and pulling its meal apart. Richard turned from the sight and watched instead the streaks of cloud change color against the brightening sky. Sister Verna would be awake soon. He still stood his watch despite her insistence that it wasn't necessary. She finally relented, but he knew she was angry because he wouldn't back down. That made her angry. What didn't? She was more angry than usual since coming through the valley the day before. She was silently livid. Richard glanced toward the little Gar to see it was still eating. How it had managed to follow him through the Valley of the Lost, he couldn't imagine. He had thought it was a mistake to keep feeding it before they reached the valley, but he felt responsible for it. Every night when he had taken his watch, it had come to him, and he had hunted food for it. He had thought he had seen the last of it when they crossed over into the old world, but somehow it had followed. The little Gar was passionately devoted to him when he was on watch. It ate with him, played with him, and slept at his feet, if not on them. When his watch was over, it hardly made a fuss about him leaving. Richard never once saw the Gar at any other time. It seemed to instinctively know to stay away from the sister, to avoid letting her see it. Richard was reasonably certain she would try to kill it. Maybe the Gar knew that. He was continually surprised by the intelligence of the furry little beast. It learned faster than any animal he had ever seen. Caitlin had told him that short-tailed Gars were smart. Now he knew how right she was. He had only to show it something once or twice to make it understand. It was learning to understand his words and tried to imitate them. Although it didn't seem to have the capacity for speech, some of its sounds came strangely close. Richard didn't know what to do about the Gar. He thought perhaps it should strike out on its own, learn to hunt and survive, but it wouldn't leave. It followed, out of sight. Wherever they went, even through danger, Perhaps it was too young to get by on its own. Maybe it saw Richard as its only way to survive. Maybe it saw him as a surrogate mother. In truth, Richard didn't really want it to leave. It had become a friend as they had traveled through the wilds. It gave him unconditional love, never criticized him, and never argued with him. It felt good to have a friend. How could he deny the same thing to the Gar? The flap of wings brought him out of his thoughts. The Gar thumped to the ground before him. It had gained a lot of weight since Richard had first found it. He would have sworn it had grown nearly half a foot, too. The sinew under the pink skin of its chest and belly had become taut, and its arms were no longer all hide and bone, as they had been, but were thickening with muscle. He was afraid to think of how big it would eventually get. He hoped it would be on its own by then. Hunting enough food to feed a full-grown short-tailed Gar would be a full-time occupation. After wiping the shaft on its fur-covered thigh to clean off the blood, the Gar flashed Richard its hideous blood-stained grin and held out the arrow. Richard pointed over his shoulder. I don't want it. Put it back where it belongs. The Gar reached over Richard's shoulder and slid the arrow back into the quiver and leaned against a stump. It contorted its features, seemingly to question if it had done it correctly. Richard smiled as he patted its full belly. Good boy, you did it right. The Gar flopped happily on the ground at his feet, contenting itself with licking blood from its claws and coarse fur. When it finished, it laid its long arms over Richard's lap and rested its head on them. You need a name. The Gar looked up. Cocking its head to the side, its tufted ears turned toward him. Name, he tapped his chest. My name is Richard. The Gar reached out and tapped Richard's chest in imitation. Richard. Richard. It cocked its head to the other side. Rawr! It growled through sharp fangs, its ears twitching. Richard nodded. Rich-erd. It tapped Richard's chest again. Rawr! It said in its throaty growl, this time showing less teeth. Rich-erd. Rich-arg. Richard laughed. That's close. Now, what are we going to call you? Richard thought about it, trying to think of something appropriate. The Gar sat, its brow bunched into deep furrows, watching him intently. After a moment, it took Richard's hand and tapped it against his chest. Ratcharg, it said. It pulled Richard's hand to its own chest, tapping it against the fur. Gratch. Gratch? Richard sat up straighter in surprise. Your name is Gratch? He tapped the Gar again. Gratch? The Gar nodded and grinned as it tapped its own chest. Gratch, Gratch. Richard was a little taken aback. It had never occurred to him that the Gar might have a name. Gratch it is, then. He tapped his own chest again. Richard, he smiled and patted the Gar's shoulder. Gratch. The Gar spread its wings and thumped its chest with open claws. Gratch. Richard laughed and the Gar leapt on him, letting out its throaty giggle as it wrestled him to the ground. Gratch's love of wrestling was second only to its love of food. The two of them tumbled across the ground, laughing and struggling to gently get the best of each other. Richard was gentler about it than Gratch. The Gar would put its mouth around Richard's arm, though thankfully, at least, it never bit him. Its needle-sharp fangs were long enough to easily go all the way through his arm, and he had seen the Gar splinter bone with those teeth. Richard brought the wrestling match to an end by sitting up on the stump. Gratch sat straddling him, arms, legs, and wings wrapped around him. It nuzzled against Richard's shoulder. Gratch knew that at dawn Richard left. Richard spied a rabbit in the underbrush, some distance off, and thought that perhaps Sister Verna would appreciate some meat for breakfast. Gratch, I need a rabbit. Gratch climbed off his lap as Richard took up his bow. After the arrow was off, he told the Gar to bring him the rabbit, but not to eat it. Gratch had learned to retrieve and was happy to do it. He always got what was left of the skinning and gutting. After Richard was done and had bid Gratch goodbye, he hiked back to camp. His mind wandered back to the vision of Kaelin he had had in the tower, and the things she had told him. The sight of her being beheaded haunted him. He recalled her words. Speak, if you must, these words, but not of the vision. Of all there were but a single one born of the magic to bring forth truth will remain alive when the shadow's threat is lifted. Therefore comes the greater darkness of the dead, for there to be a chance at life's bond, This one in white must be offered to her people to bring their joy and good cheer. He knew who the this one in white was. He knew what bring their joy and good cheer meant. He thought too about the prophecy that Sister Verna had told him of, the one that said, "He is the bringer of death, and he shall so name himself." She claimed the prophecy said that the holder of the sword is able to call the dead forth, call the past into the present. He wondered and worried what that could mean. At the camp, he found Sister Verna squatted at the fire, cooking bannock. The aroma made his stomach grumble. The sparsely wooded country was coming to life with sounds of animals and bugs heralding the dawn. Clusters of small, dark birds sang from the tall, thinly foliated trees, and gray squirrels chased each other up and down their branches. Richard hung the skewer with the rabbit over the fire as Sister Verna continued to mind the bannock. "I brought you some breakfast. I thought you might like some meat." She gave only a grunt of acknowledgement. "You still angry with me for saving your life yesterday?" She carefully laid another small stick on the fire. "I am not angry with you for saving my life, Richard." "I thought you said your creator hated lies. Do you think he believes you?" "I don't." Her face turned so red, Richard thought her curly hair might catch fire. "You will not speak blasphemy." "And lying is not?" "You do not understand, Richard, why I am angry." Richard sat on the ground and, grasping his ankles, folded his legs in. "Maybe I do. You're supposed to be my protector, not the other way around. Maybe you feel that you have failed. But I don't feel that you failed. We both just did what we had to survive." "Did what we must." Fine wrinkles radiated around her eyes as they narrowed. "As I recall from the book, when Bonnie, Geraldine, and Jessup led the people across the Poison River, some of those people died." Sorry, wrong voice. Happens sometimes. "As I recall from the book, when Bonnie, Geraldine, and Jessup led the people across the Poison River, some of those people died." Richard smiled to himself. "So you really did read it." "I told you I did. That was foolhardy. We could have been killed taking that risk. We didn't have any choice." "You always have a choice, Richard. That is what I am trying to teach you." She sat back on her heels. "The wizards who created that place thought they had no choice, but they made things worse. You were using your Han back there, and you were doing it without understanding the consequences. What choice did we have?" Hands on her knees, she leaned forward. "We always have a choice, Richard. You were lucky this time, that your use of magic didn't get you killed." "What are you talking about?" Sister Verna drew a saddlebag close and started rummaging through it, finally pulling out a green cloth bag. "You got some blood from that beast on your arm. Did any of the bugs bite you?" "On my legs." "Show me." Richard pulled up his pant legs and showed her the swollen red bites. She shook her head and, whispering to herself, pulled first one and then a second bottle from the bag. With a stick found on the ground nearby, she dipped a white paste from one bottle and wiped it onto the flat of a knife blade. She threw the stick in the fire. Taking up another stick, she dipped a dark paste from the other bottle and mixed it with the light on the flat of the blade, then spread it along the edge. She drew the second stick with some of the mixed paste on it into the fire. Richard flinched when it exploded in a white-hot ball of fire that lifted skyward, dissipating as it rose, turning to a boiling cloud of black smoke. She held up the knife to reveal a gray paste spread on the blade. "Light and dark, earth and sky. Magic to that heal what would otherwise kill you by tonight. You have a way of getting yourself out onto thin limbs, Richard. Each step you take only makes your predicament worse. Now come over here, closer." Richard dug his heels in and scooted around the fire. "Were you trying to decide whether or not you were going to help me?" "Of course not. This is made from powerful magic. Constructed magic to smother the venom injected into you by the conjured creatures. Too soon, and the cure would kill you. Too late, the bites would kill you. It must be the right kind of magic at the right time. I was simply waiting for the proper time." Richard wanted to argue with her, but instead said, "Thank you for helping me." She frowned at him before leaning over his bites. "Sister, how was I making things worse?" "You were being reckless. Using magic is dangerous, not only to others, but to the one who calls it forth as well." Richard winced as she drew the edge across one of the bites. First one way, then the other, cutting an X on it. The sting made his eyes water. "How can it be dangerous to me?" She concentrated as she leaned over his leg, whispering an incantation while stroking the knife across his swollen flesh. He tried not to jump when she cut the next bite. She was only making light cuts, but they stung fiercely. It is like starting a fire in the center of a tinder dry wood. You find yourself in the center of the fire, in the center of what you have started. What you did was foolish and dangerous. Sister Verna, I was trying to stay alive. She jabbed a finger at one of the painful bites. And look what happened! If I don't heal you, you'll die. She finished with his legs and turned her attention to his arm. When we were being attacked by those When we were being attacked by those beasts, you thought to save us, but everything you did only increased the danger. When she finished, she held the knife blade over the fire. A thin stream of white flame roared up from the steel, consuming the remaining paste. She held the blade to the fire until the paste and the white flame were gone. If I hadn't acted, sister, we would be dead. She shook the hot blade at him. I did not say you were wrong to act. I said you acted in the wrong way. You used the wrong kind of magic. I used the only thing I had, the sword. She pitched the knife. With a thunk, it stuck solidly in a piece of firewood. Acting without knowing the consequences of the magic you call forth is perilous behavior. Well, nothing you were doing was helping. Sister Verna rocked back on her heels, stared at him for a moment, and then turned to busy herself with replacing the bottles in the green bag. I'm sorry, sister. I didn't really mean that. It didn't come out the way I intended. It only meant that you weren't able to sense the way, and I knew if we stayed, we would be killed. The bottles clinked together as she moved them around in the bag. She seemed to be having difficulty getting them packed the way she wanted. Richard, do you think that controlling the gift, using magic, is what you are to learn with us? That is the easy part, knowing what kind of magic to use, how much to use, when to use it, and the consequences of using it. That is the hard part. That is the meaning of everything. How much, when, and what if. Just like the magic I have put on your bites. She fixed him with a deadly serious expression. Without that knowledge, you are a blind man swinging an axe in a crowd of children. You have no idea of the danger you invoke when you use magic. We try to give you sight and some sense before you swing that axe. Richard picked at a clump of grass at his feet. Never thought about it that way. Perhaps if anything, I should be angry with myself for being foolish. I didn't think there was anything powerful enough to tempt me into that trap. I was wrong. Thank you, Richard, for saving me. He wrapped a long stalk of grass around his finger. I was so relieved to find you. I thought you were dead. I'm glad you're not. She had pulled all the little bottles out of the bag and set them on the ground. I could have been lost in that spell for all time. I should have been. What do you mean? There seemed to him to be more bottles than would fit in the bag, but then he had seen them all come out. We have tried to rescue sisters before. We have seen some, and their charges lost in those enchantment spells. I saw one the first time I went through. We have never been able to get them out. Sisters have died trying. She started replacing the bottles. You used magic. I used the sword. The sword has magic, you know. No, you didn't use the sword's magic. You used your Han. Even though you didn't realize it, using your Han through desire without wisdom is the most dangerous thing you can do. Sister, I think it was just the sword's magic. When you called to me, I heard you. We have tried to call to others, and they have never heard us, not once. You just didn't know how. You couldn't hear me either until I stepped through some sort of sparkling wall around you. Then you couldn't hear me. Or then you could hear me. You just have to step through that wall first. She pushed bottles to each side to make room as she spoke softly. We know that, Richard. We have tried every sort of magic, and we have never been able to pass through or break the wall of one of these spells, or been able to get the attention of one captured by it. No one has ever been brought out of an enchantment spell before. She replaced the last bottle and finally turned to face him. Thank you, Richard. He shrugged as he pulled the grass off his finger. Well, it was the least I could do to make up for what I did. For what you did? Richard occupied himself with carefully rolling his pants back down. Well, before I saved you, I kind of killed you. She leaned closer. You did what? You were hurting me with your magic, with the collar. I'm sorry, Richard. I was in the spell and didn't realize what I was doing. I didn't intend to hurt you. He shook his head. Not then. Before, in the White Tower. She leaned even closer and gritted her teeth. You went into a tower? Are you mad? I told you what those towers are. How could you be so... Sister, I had no choice. We have already discussed choice. I told you how dangerous those towers are. I told you to stay away from them. Look, there was lightning all around. It was trying to strike me. I didn't know what else to do, so I dove through an archway into the tower for protection. Can't you follow the simplest instructions? Must you always act a child? Richard looked up from under his eyebrows. Those were your exact words. You came into the tower. I was sure it was you. You were angry with me, much as you are now, and you used those exact words. He gritted his teeth as he put a finger to the collar at his neck. You used this. You used it to throw me against the wall and pin me there with it. Can this collar do that, sister? She sat much quieter. Yes. We don't have the power of a wizard, the Maelhan. The collar amplifies our power, so we may be stronger than the one wearing it, so we can teach them. His voice was deep with anger. Then you used it to give me pain, like the pain you did for real, when you were in the spell, only it was stronger, and went on and on. Can the collar do that too, sister? She pulled a clump of grass to her side and began cleaning her hands with it, avoiding his glare. Yes, but that was the vision, Richard. I wasn't really doing it. I told you to stop hurting me, or I would put a stop to it. You wouldn't stop, so I called the sword's magic and broke the bond of the power holding me. You were furious. You said that I had made my last mistake. You said you were going to kill me for fighting you. You were going to kill me, sister. I'm sorry, Richard, she whispered as she looked up. But you had to suffer that. Her voice regained some of its strength. So, what did you do to me? To the vision of me? He leaned over and touched the edge of his first finger to the side of her shoulder. I cut you in half with the sword. Right here. Her hands stopped. She was stone still. Some of the color had left her face. Finally, she regained her composure. Richard picked the clump of grass by his foot again. I didn't want to do it, but I was positive you were going to kill me. She tossed the grass aside. I'm sure you were, Richard, but that was only a vision. If it were real, it wouldn't have turned out that way. You would not have been able to do what you did. Who are you trying to convince, sister? Me or yourself? She met his glare. The things you saw were not as they are in the real world. They are simply illusions. Richard let it drop. He turned the stick with the rabbit to cook the other side, and slid the iron plate with the bannock to the side of the fire to let it cool. Anyway, when I saw you again, I didn't know if you were a vision or real, but I truly hoped you were alive. I didn't want to kill you. He looked up and smiled. Besides, I promised you that you would get through the Valley of the Lost. She nodded. Yes, you did. More desire than wisdom indeed. Sister, I was only doing what I could think of to survive, to help you survive too. She sighed and shook her head. Richard, I know you're trying to do your best, but you must understand that what you think is best is not necessarily right. You're calling your Han without knowing what you're doing, or even realizing that you're doing it. In so doing, you tempt danger you can't fathom. How was I using my Han? Wizards make promises that their Han strives to keep. You promised me you would help me get through the valley, save me, but in so doing, you have invoked prophecy. Richard frowned. I've given no prophecy. Not only given it, but used your Han without realizing it. Used prophecy without knowing its form to do something in the past to aid you in the future. What are you talking about? You destroyed the horse's bits. I told you at the time why I did that. They're cruel. She shook her head. That's what I'm talking about. You think you did it for one reason, but it served another purpose. Your conscious mind is simply seeking to rationalize what your Han is doing. When we were running from the valley, I didn't believe in what you were doing, and I tried to turn my horse. Because he didn't have a bit, I was unable to. So what? She leaned closer. Destroying the bits in the past satisfied a need of a promise in the future. That was using prophecy. You're swinging the axe blindly. Richard gave her a skeptical expression. That's a stretch, sister, even for you. I know how the gift works, Richard. Richard thought about it and finally decided he didn't believe her, but decided, too, that he didn't want to argue with her about it. There were other things he wanted to know. Is your little book full? I haven't seen you writing in it. I sent a message yesterday that we have come through the valley. I have nothing else to write, that's all. The book is magic. With magic, we erase old messages. I erased all but 2 pages, but with what I added yesterday, there are now 3 pages full. Richard tore off a corner of the hot bannock. Who is the prelate? She charges the Sisters of Light. She is... Her eyes narrowed. I've never mentioned her. How do you know of her? Richard licked the crumbs from his fingers. I read it in your book. Her hand flew to her belt, groping for the book. It was there, where it always was. You've read my private writing. You have no right. I will... You were dead at the time. Her mouth snapped shut, and he went on. When I killed you, or the illusion of you, the book fell on the ground. I read it. The tension left her muscles. Oh, well, that's simply part of the illusion. I told you, it's not as things are in real life. Richard tore off another corner of bannock. There were only 2 pages with writing, just as the real book. Not until after we were through the valley did you add the 3rd. Back then, there was only 2. She watched him eating the bannock. Illusion, Richard. He looked up. 1 page said, I am the sister in charge of this boy. These directives are beyond reason, if not absurd. I demand to know the meaning of these instructions. I demand to know upon whose authority they are given. Yours in the service of the light, Sister Verna Sovereignty. The 2nd page said, You will do as you are instructed or suffer the consequences. Do not presume to question the orders of the palace again. In my own hand, the prelate. The sister's face had drained of color. You had no business reading something belonging to another. As I said, you were dead at the time. What instructions did they give you about me that made you so angry? The color came back to her face in a rush. It has to do with a technicality. It's nothing you would understand, and anyway, it's not your business. Richard lifted an eyebrow. Not my business. You claim you are only trying to help me. Yet you've taken me prisoner, and you say it's not my business. I have this collar around my neck, and with it you can hurt me, perhaps kill me, and you say it is not my business. You tell me I must do the things you say, that I must take them on faith, even though that faith is shaken with every new thing I discover. Yet it's not my business. You tell me that the illusion I saw was not as things are in the real world, yet I find it was, and you tell me it's not my business. Sister Verna was silent. She watched him without emotion. Watched him, he thought, as if he were a bug in a box. Sister Verna, will you tell me one thing I've been wondering about? If I can. He pulled his legs up tighter under himself. He tried to keep any hostility out of his tone. When you first saw me, you were surprised that I was grown. You thought that I would be young. That's right. We have ones at the palace who can sense one born with the gift, but you were hidden from us, so it took us a very long time to find you. But you told me just the other day that you have spent over half your life away from the palace searching for me. If you've spent 20-odd years looking for me, how could you expect me to be young? You would have expected me to be grown, unless you didn't know I had been born and started searching for me long before anyone at the palace sensed me. Her answer came in a cautious, quiet voice. It is as you say. It has never happened this way before. So why would you come looking for me before any of you sensed that one with the gift had been born? She chose her words carefully. We didn't know precisely when you would be born, but we knew you would be. So we were sent in search. How did you know I would be born? You are spoken of in prophecy. Richard nodded. He wanted to know about this prophecy and why they thought he was so important, but he didn't want to stray from the trail he was following at the moment. So you knew it might be many years before you found me? Yes. We didn't know when you would be born. We were only able to narrow it to a range of decades. How are the sisters who are to be sent chosen? We're selected by the prelate. You have no say in the matter? She tensed, as if suspicious she might accidentally be slipping her neck through a noose, yet was unable to keep from voicing her faith. We work in the service of the Creator. We would have no reason to object. The whole purpose of the palace is to help those with the gift. To be selected to save one with the gift is one of the greatest honors a sister may receive. So none of the others sent have ever had to give up so many years of their lives to rescue one with the gift. No, I never heard of it taking more than a year, but I knew this assignment could last for decades. Richard smiled to himself in triumph. He leaned back, stretching his muscles. He took a deep breath. Now I understand. Her eyes narrowed. What do you understand? I understand, Sister Verna, why you treat me the way you do. I understand why we're always fighting, why we're always at each other's throat. I understand why you resent me, why you hate me. She looked like someone waiting for the trap door to fall out from under her. I don't hate you, Richard. He nodded and pulled the catch on the trap door. Yes, you do. You hate me, and I don't blame you. I understand. You had to give up Jedediah because of me. She flinched as if a noose had just tightened around her neck. Richard, you will not speak to me, and you resent me because of that. Not because of what happened to the other two sisters. It's because of Jedediah. If it weren't for me, you would be with him. You would have been with him for the last 20 years. You had to give up the love of your life to go on this accursed quest to find me. They sent you. You had no choice. You had to go. It's your duty, and it cost you your love and the children you might have had. That's what I've cost you, why you hate me. Sister Verna sat and stared. She neither spoke nor moved. Finally, she said, The seeker, indeed. I'm sorry, Sister Verna. No need to be, Richard. You don't know what you're talking about. She slowly lifted the rabbit from the fire, setting it on the iron plate with the bannock. For a moment, she stared off into nothing. We had better finish eating. We must be on our way. Fine, but I just want you to consider, sister, that it's not by my choice. I didn't do this to you. The prelate did. You should either be angry with her, or if you're so devoted to your duty, to your creator as you claim, then you should have joy in his service. Either way, please stop blaming me. She opened her mouth to speak, but then instead fumbled with the stopper on the water skin, finally getting it off, and took a long drink, drawing deep breaths when she finished. She dabbed her sleeve to her wet lips, her unwavering gaze locked on his. Soon, soon, Richard, we will be to the palace. But first we have to pass through the land of a very dangerous people. The sisters have an arrangement with them. To be allowed to pass, you will have to do a task for them. You will do it, or there will be great trouble. What will I have to do? You will have to kill someone for them. Sister Verna, I promise you I'm not going to. Her index finger rose from her fist, commanding silence. Don't you dare swing the axe this time, Richard, she whispered. You have no idea of the consequences. She rose to her feet. Get the horses ready. We must be leaving. Richard stood. Aren't you going to have your breakfast? She ignored his question and stepped close to him. It takes two to argue, Richard. You're always angry with me. With everything I tell you, you resent me. You hate me. Because you think I made you put on that collar. But I didn't, and you know it. Kaylin made you put it on. It is because of her you wear the Radahan. If it weren't for her, you wouldn't be with me. That's what I've cost you and why you hate me. But I think you should consider, Richard, that it is not by my choice. I didn't do this to you. Kaylin did. You should either be angry with her, or if you're so devoted to her as you claim, then have joy in carrying out her wishes. Perhaps she has valid reasons for them. Maybe she has your interests at heart. Either way, please stop blaming me. Richard tried to swallow, but couldn't. And that is the end of chapter 36. And with the next chapter, we will pick up with Richard and Kaylin and everybody else. Well, no. Technically, the next chapter is going to be Kaylin and Chandlin. And that is where we are going to pick up next week. Now, guys, remember, if you have missed any story times, and by the way, everyone who came in, welcome. Thank you for sitting here and watching. Sorry I didn't respond to you while I was reading. I have decided through much deliberation that I'm no longer going to be responding to comments during story time. I'd like to focus on the reading. So, like right now, I started at 8. It's 8:56, and I'm done with both books. Normally, I'm not done till 10:30 or 11. Now that means I have no time with Baby Dragon. I have no time to rest and relax. That means I have to get off of here and try and go directly to sleep to be up at 6 a.m. And it's incredibly hard. Um, and there's so much more that I want to do with story time, but I can't do that if I keep getting off track. Now, guys, remember, if you miss a story time, you can find it on my YouTube. As soon as I'm done doing story time on YouTube, it is loaded up as a video onto my page. So if you want, if you're on TikTok and you're not following my YouTube, just click on my profile, click on the Instagram button, and then you'll be able to click on YouTube to follow it. If you're on YouTube, well, then you're there already. You should be able to look at other videos. What I'm also going to start doing tomorrow is instead of just putting story time on them, I'm going to put story time along with the date so that you can find them. Okay. Should have been doing that before. Didn't really think of it. Sorry. But we will start doing that tomorrow. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys. You guys have a nice night. Be safe. Do your research. I am so glad that I'm able to go live on TikTok again. If you guys have any other problems or any other questions, you can message me on TikTok if we're friends, or message me on Instagram if we're not. If you have me other places, then message me other places. It is not that hard. But otherwise, you guys have a nice night, and I will talk to you guys later. Okay? Bye.